Hi everyone, my name is Flavia Teixeira. I'm from the Light in the Shire Spiritist group. We are in Sydney, Australia. Today is the 23rd of August 2022. Today we're going to another study of what is Spiritism. And so we're going to be talking about the human beings after death, and from pages 212 to page 216. So in the previous class, so this part of actually the book is a series of questions, like questionings by, I would say, Kardec, and to answer most of the questions that we have. So Fran's last class, so she talked you know, how the soul separates from the body and what happening after the death of the material body, what happened to the soul after the, you know, the passing. And so when, you know, when the body, when the soul, when you die, what happened to our soul, all of that. So it's very important questionings, and I suppose this lots of people actually do have these questions themselves, and especially people, if you don't have a belief, you know, death can become a really big blank in your life. So being afraid of death is a big thing. So also keeping, I think we're just studying the final part of this book. I think next class is our last few pages of what is the Spiritism. So we will resume our studies. And so this last part is a lot of questions that, you know, and Kardec answering those questions. So on question 150, he's asking, where does the spirit goes after left the body? So, so Kardec writes here that it does not become lost in immensity of the infinite. So, you know, our soul doesn't actually get lost. We know through, you know, now many, I would say, more than 2 decades of study of the spirit is that the spirit goes back to their erraticity, which is the spiritual world, until in our case, because we are incarnated on earth, until it doesn't have the necessity of reincarnating anymore, because it has achieved a level of evolution that it doesn't necessarily need to reincarnate. But until then, the spirit becomes errant, in an errant state in the spiritual world, and it's in generally, like and this is what we're going to probably say quite a few times. We have to understand the spirits have different levels of evolvement. Yeah, so depend what you did in your life, and also how was your passing, or how is your relation with the material world, and all of that makes it, it's actually part of this process. So in his Kardec answers here, it says it finds itself amongst those it used to know, especially amongst those it used to love. So it depends on the situation too, you know, not necessarily that sometimes just after it leaves the body, not necessarily is going to stay with those spirits. Normally those spirits come to aid the disincarnation process, but not necessarily they will stay with them. So it is, once we become spirits, we don't have the material world in general. The spirits can travel easily in this spiritual world. And then Kardec or someone asked this question, does the soul retain its affection from earth? And he says it retains all the moral affections. It forgets only the material affections that are no longer important to it. Okay, so we're only going to keep in our hearts the people that were important in our lives, those people that we that our connection wasn't a greater one. It was just like, if he's a working friend, someone that passed through your life but didn't create any impression, or you like the person but not necessarily is part of your, let's say, group of close friends. Or so these people normally you might encounter maybe even in future lives, but it tends to, you just keep these affections that actually made impact in your life, I'd say. And so after we also tend to see relatives and friends, they already passed. So as we go back to the spiritual world, we might encounter and see these friends, not only on the previous incarnation, but maybe even from further incarnations back. So depend on, I suppose, on the level of affinity you have with those spirits. And question 152 is asking, does the soul retain any memory of what it did while on Earth, and is still interested in the endeavors it left finished? Yes, it does. Like we know now, I suppose, not even probably in Kardec time, is when they start to have more this contact with the spiritual world. But now we actually have a lot of contact with spiritual 200 years on in spiritism. So we know that sometimes people disincarnated, and they don't even realize they actually died. They even don't, only small things that sometimes they just start to become aware. There's if they try to talk to someone, that person doesn't listen to them, or they might realize that something is not right. But there is many cases, and you can read in many books that at the moment of disincarnation, depending on the situation of the spirit, it will not even realize that actually it's not actually, it became a spirit. So yeah, so they do retain the memory of some point, and it depends also how evolved in the nature of these the spirits, and what was relevant to them. So dematerialized spirits care little about material matters and are happy to be free of them. So a really good book to read about this is actually Hell and Heaven. It was written by Allan Kardec, and it talks about, it shows a few cases of spirits that came back to, they went into medium meetings to tell how was they passing from a material life, and how, like the process of disincarnation. So it's, of course, it starts from elevated spirits, I think, to be more positive, and into a point of people that are less evolved, really attached to the material, or people that actually attempted against their lives. All of that makes a difference when you disincarnated. So on question 153, Kardec is asking, is the spiritual world, does the soul once again meet the relatives and friends who preceded? And we already answered that. Yes, not necessarily, but generally, yeah, they do. These people generally help them on the process of disincarnation, not just meeting, people from previous, just the incarnation, just ceased, but maybe from even further incarnations, previous existences. And of course, we keep the affections, and they are generally the ones, they help on the disincarnation process, as I said that before. And if this spirit is being denied of meeting the loved ones, is it's probably a punishment for guilty spirits. So guilt spirits normally, they're not allowed. And we know also, as I mentioned before, depending on the condition of how the spirit passes, it goes to maybe to a facility where the spirit will take time to recuperate. And sometimes if you have someone that is incarnated before you, they might be a bit higher than you, and also they need permission to see you and make sure that you are in conditions to see them. In question 154, in the other life, what is the intellectual and moral state of children who died at a very young age? Are their faculties still as a childlike as they were while incarnated? And this is like, and we know a bit more about this, I suppose, now. And some spirits, when they have a very short life, it's just they incarnate just to finish off. Sometimes they left from previous existence, and they just need that little time to complete that cycle. Yeah. Or sometimes the spirits that, you know, as I said, just need that little time, and sometimes don't even need to reincarnate anymore. So depend on the spirit, depend what happened before. I think it's a book in Portuguese. I'm not sure that it has a translation for English. It's from Chico's Xavier. I think it was called Renounce. And I think that, yeah.
Renunciation.
It does exist in English, the book?
I think that series has started to be translated, yes.
Yeah, and I think on that book, I think it shows, do you remember, I don't know if you remember, from the brother or of the girl or someone that died. And then I think he had like a physical defect, and he came back like reincarnated as soon as a child and only had a very short life. I don't remember if it's the brother or it was someone that did some bad things, but, you know, was given the opportunity to just finish off that what had left as a child and disincarnate quite. I don't know if you remember that. Probably need to read the book again.
Yeah, I think it's important to just say that every case might be different, but yeah, sometimes you just have a short period of life, to make up for whatever reason. So it could be, this is the explanation, I guess, that Kardec has received from the spirits. Yes.
Yeah, and we know also the spirit, the spirit fully incarnated, or it's when the child's about 7 years is actually, you know, until then is still in a process of incarnation. Yeah, so until then, so if the spirits, I suppose the child disincarnate before that, is still pretty much. So it depends on each case, but we have to remember the spirit, the soul. It's most of the time is old. Yeah, so we incarnate. So you are like an old soul incarnated into a young body. So sometimes it goes back. I think the André Luiz books, Our Home, Nosso Lar. I think it talks about the children's home. You know, children that disincarnated. You know, the spirits that disincarnated as a children. You know, going back to the spiritual world and learning, and then
because that's where it gets complicated, right? Because we might have the psyche of adults, and then when we prepare for a new incarnation, we need to go into a state of numbness, and that's what we discussed in that class when we were talking about the preparation for incarnation. And then we might become a bit more childlike because we need to, I guess, reduce our level of awareness so we can have a new blank slate again. But then, yeah, like you said, if we discarnate before we have completely linked our consciousness and our full awareness to the new body, to the new level of consciousness of that new life, we might go back to the spiritual realm either as a partial adult-like conscious being, or we might have already fully reincarnated as a child that completed those first 7 years and is completely linked to the new body, whereby the spirit needs a transitional period in the spiritual realm in places like you just described. And then we can slowly regain consciousness of who we were, what we were doing, because, you know, we live many lives as children, I guess.
Yeah.
But then what stays in our consciousness is what, is part of that essence that keeps on going.
Yeah, so it will depend, as we're saying, depend, and try and repeat it again, depend on each case is separate, is different. And I think also, even for the learning process of the own spirit, like maybe it's good for the spirit just to remain as a childlike. And so I think spirituality is greater, the whole spiritual world is great enough to make sure these decisions are made to the benefit of the spirit, of the soul. So in this sense, the spirit's communication sometimes assumes childlike language. So even the spirit went back to the spiritual world and to communicate with the family, it will communicate as a child, just so the mother can kind of, connect. If that spirit talks like an adult, the mother is going to, feel. So sometimes Chico Xavier, the Brazilian medium, used to do a lot of that. He used to communicate a lot with his spirits, especially mothers would come on his aid for, asking for communication with their sons because they were so, sad with their loss and trying to find some console in these communications. So he used to write most of the communications was psychographic, and the children would, talk to the mother like they would talk, or they would write as they were talking to their mothers, like as a kid anyway. So the the intellectual state of the soul mentally, in that sense also it says about the people that are impaired, like the people that are mentally impaired. So when you incarnated and you have a mental disability, we have to understand that's just on the material world. Even like for mentally impaired people, even when they sleep, on the spiritual world, they are the spirit, which they are. They're not mentally, impaired spirits. It's just when they incarnated for the purpose of the evolvement, they're actually mentally impaired. And the same valid for insane people. Yeah, after the death, they will be the spirits they are. Because in the spiritual world, there is no mentally impaired, I suppose, spirits, at least into the level that, like the spirits that are surrounded by good spirits, or, and they generally a good, we're not going to go down to, like, we're not going to go into more explanation on that, but it does. So in question 155 is asking, after death, what is the difference between the souls of learned individuals and unlearned ones, and between the souls of primitives and civilized people? And we explained many times, like, if you have evolved, everything you've learned, you acquired for yourself, like all these evolve, and so you can't take it back. So it means the primitive soul is going to keep primitive if it doesn't evolve from that state, if it keeps doing the same things. The same for, if you haven't learned anything, we're taking what we learn. We don't go back in our learnings. Yeah, we sometimes can, with our actions and attitudes, we can compromise our incarnation, but we not necessarily go back into what we already know. On question 156 is asked, do souls progress intellectually and morally after death? And yes, they can. It's depend on them, because we know, even like when we incarnated, when we sleep, we generally go back to the spiritual to keep studying. Yeah. So and the same happens when we disincarnated. We go back to the spiritual world. If we're not in a condition, in a mental condition, like, that we're going to get assistance. And once we are good enough in a condition, then we just study. We do. The intellectually and morally progress depends on the individual. We know that it's a lot easier to evolve intellectually than morally. So the souls that who remain stationary return to an existence similar to the one they left. And those who have progressed merit an incarnation of a higher level. So since progress is proportional to the spirit's will, there are spirits who for a long time remain to taste and inclinations they had during the life, who pursue the same ideas. So as I said before, like, it's up to you, like, if you want to evolve. Like, I remember once someone made a very interesting comparison. They say our evolution, our progress is like a rocket. Like when we, like scientists launch, like NASA launch a rocket, it actually doesn't go in a straight line. It goes into, so it varies from its fault, and then they correct the course and goes to another way. It will go eventually, get where it gets to the point they want to go, but not in a straight line. And that's us incarnating. We want to go this way, but we normally go that way. Okay, no, that way, and then we go in a different ways. So that's us. On question 157 is asking, is a person's fate in the future life irrevocably sealed after death? And nothing is sealed, nothing is sure, and nothing, because we have to understand, even after death, like, spirits make decisions. Yeah, like, we have the free will. Like, the choices we make, we are responsible for those choices. So if we say that, everything is already decided, then worry would be a complete, like we say here, a complete negation of God's goodness and justice. Yeah. So if our fate is already written, what is the point to try to work on ourselves? Yeah. So that's the main. No, like, nothing is sealed. We can't even change during our incarnation what is being decided. Yeah, so we know that before we reincarnate, we make a decision on how we want to live our lives to be able to achieve the evolvement that we need. And even sometimes there we can change during our incarnation according to the choices we make. In that sense also, we're talking about the mentally impaired people and primitive individuals. If they are born like that, and if life is sealed after death, so they're never going to change. So it goes against all the principles. So, and asking, saying here, all the children that die before having experienced life. Yeah, so fate, so it changes. Like, we don't, the goodness of God and the justice is that actually we can change our faith. In that sense, I suppose that that view that once we die, you either go to hell or heaven. Yeah, it doesn't happen in Spiritism. We don't believe that. You might end up yourself in maybe in a limbo. Yeah, but you can actually make your way up. You can get out of that situation if you wanted to. You don't have to stay there forever. Some spirits stay there for a long time because they can't see light. They can't change their mindsets, and they stay for many, sometimes centuries. But it's the spirits that seek help and seek God. They are the ones that make their way through, leave that situation, and able to go to a better place. So yeah, so no, there is no faith. We can change And I suppose even when we incarnated, yeah, there is no fate. We can always change the way our life is. We've seen so many inspiring people, and I suppose now we have access to, social media and see like so many people are able to overcome, their difficulties, disabilities, and have sometimes even a fulfilled life with the little they have. So the same for the spirit, the same thing. So 158 question is, in the future life, what is the fate of children who die at a very young age? As we know, the soul, an incarnation is a split of second on a spirit's life. Yeah, so we are a spirit. So that child, it's a child as incarnated as in a material world, but not on the spiritual world. So as we mentioned before, when this disincarnate might stay as a childlike for a while for the evolution process or the learning they need to go through, but it will go back into the adult sort of a soul stage. So yeah, we'll just say a combination of two throughout eternity would be an injustice. Yeah, so we know either, the child, the idea that the Catholic, the church say, like, if you die as a child, you're going to become an angel, it's going to be forever as an angel. No, nothing is eternal in that sense. Yeah, so the spirit is immortal, the soul is immortal, but the aim is actually to evolve, to be like in the angel style, like what we perceive as an angel. We have to be really evolved spirits, and that only happens through many incarnations and also the will of the spirits to become better. And the spirits at the end of the day, yeah, so the fate of the spirit is the result of what they deserve and what they've done in previous existence. That child might, died early, but what they done in previous existence also counts in determines what's going to happen in the next. And as I mentioned before, we actually choose the path that we want to take when we incarnate. We, together with the spirit, like workers, they help us to write our incarnation path. Question 159, does the soul have occupations in the spirit life? And do they concern themselves with the matter other than their joys and sufferings? Yes, they do. The books, like the oldest series of André Luiz, it talks about, so the first one is Our Home, and then there is a series of books, Missionaries of the Light, and so they never stop working, they never stop studying. So when we go back to the spiritual world, we are constantly studying and working. And more we work, we get bonus points to be able to do things. Maybe on the books of André Luiz, he's saying he wanted to visit his family, and he needed a certain kind of bonus points, and he collected those by working, and to be able to have the merit to visit his families. And if we don't, yeah, it would be, again, if we just die and do nothing, it also goes against the spirit itself. It says, yeah, if souls were concerned only with themselves throughout eternity, they would be selfish. Yeah, so God condemns selfish. So then it's completely against what God's beliefs. So soul and spirits have occupations keeping their degree of advancement, while at the same time they seek to learn and improve themselves. And the last question for today is 106. Actually, it's quite big. They had a big answer. So what do suffering of the soul consist of after death? Are guilty souls tortured in material flames? Most of the books that mentions and all the spirits that, most of the spirits that suffering after death, they suffer from guilt. The things that they should have done it and they didn't do it. Most of the guilt is our mental suffering comes from the things we haven't done it. Not necessarily from some spirits, like when they die, they might be find themselves wronged by other spirits. So, but in general, like the torture comes from ourselves most of the time. So there is no material flames because we don't live, there is not a material world, this is spiritual, but the sufferings, and there's also, it says here, yeah, so the church nowadays realize perfectly well that the fire of hell is the mental and not physical. And it's true, like, you know, like our mental ability sometimes make us to suffer a lot. And that the same happens as the spirits, yeah? So spirits communications have brought them before our eyes. Such as sufferings are not uniform and vary infinitely according to the nature and degree of the wrong committed. And it is nearly always these very wrongs that serve as punishment. So we keep blaming ourselves with the things that we should have done. And, you know, like sometimes we commit ourselves to do certain things and we don't achieve them. So in that sense, if we say that murderers are forced to remain, so in the spiritual, you know, realm, after the spirits disincarnate, sometimes murderers are forced to remain at the place of their crime and to see their victims continuously in front of them. And the people that are sensualistic and materialistic taste retain the same taste, and the impossibility of physically satisfying them is a true torture. Very interesting, like we have seen a lot and read a lot in the spirits books, is like people that have addictions. Yeah, when they disincarnated because of their addictions, they're gonna try to get their sense, you know, like what happened is they try to be close to people that have an addiction so they can actually absorb when that person is actually, say, if you smoke cigarettes, yeah. So after, when you become spirits and you still really want to smoke, you're going to get close to a person incarnated that smokes. So every time they have a cigarette, you actually feel, you have this sensation. And that's why, like saying, like most of the time when we have an addiction, we might have a bunch of spirits with us. Yeah, so you go out drinking, you might have a bunch of spirits behind you, with you, next to you. They're actually absorbing the sensation. So, and they're telling you like, yeah, have a drink, have a drink, have a drink, have a drink, because they want to drink, right? So the same from when we disincarnate. So people there, you know, love to eat, like meat, yeah. All those, you know, when they disincarnate, they're gonna have the crave for those foods. But we know, especially in the spiritual world, they can make it up. Food, the spiritual realm, and yeah, workers and spirits learn how to produce their own food. Is they can do the vegetables and stuff, but they cannot reproduce the taste of meat. So like that. So the people that are very meat eaters, when they disincarnate, they're going to be craving meat. And there's no in the spiritual world. And so look, we take our moral imperfections with us, yeah. So every the way, yeah. So people that are very, you know, misers, they say, it tells us the misers, yeah. They're gonna keep being like that, yeah. And if you're too connected to the material world, if you attach to your material possessions, you're very likely to stay around them because you just cannot live. So So besides spiritual punishments, there are physical punishments in trials that not yet purified spirits must endure in the incarnations, where it's placed in a position to bear, and it may made others to bear. Okay, so it says here, so like if you being humiliated and if had been proud, yeah. So if you're being humiliated in this life forever, you probably in the previous life you were a proud person, yeah. So if you misuse the wealth, you know, probably next life you're going to be in poverty stricken. You're going to probably lack financials. So if you and this is for anything that you have abused in one life, you might be deprived on the next one as a matter of learning. Yeah. So I think we were having a laugh the other day, saying me and my flatmate, we were saying, "But next life, you know, like we were born women because last life we abused our positions as a man. Now we just came to remind ourselves that how much true women go through so many, a change of hormones and all that stuff, and so." We're just having a laugh. We know we probably are men last life, and we're just making a fun of women when they're feeling unwell. And then now we're just having a laugh on that. So it will depend how you behaved yourself and how bad, you did. So if you really used your power, we always say that whatever is given to you is so you can use in benefit of others, not just for yourself. And we see in this world that we live now that, so many people is still, like holding to themselves and letting other people, they could help other people, but they don't. In many instances, we have to understand that it's not just material we can give to people. Yeah. We can give a kind word, we can give like love, sympathy, anything. Listening to your friends. Yeah, we can listen to our friends. I got a message from a friend of mine. We had a long conversation. He is at the moment living in Poland. And one day we were talking, and we talked for about 2 hours, and I was listening his problems he was having. He had when he separated from his first wife, and then I received a message the other day. He was saying how important that conversation was for him, even though he was already separated like for 10-15 years. The moment he was talking to me and open up and to me, he had a click. And from that on, he was able to start to have a conversation with his ex, which he haven't had much talk to her for years. And from that moment on, he was able to open his mind just from talking, and able to start now to talk back to his kids and stuff like that. And he was so thankful that I actually spent the time and listened to him. So that's it. Yeah, so I hope so you can get What is the Spiritist book is on Cardecopedia. So we've been using the Cardecopedia link to produce these PowerPoints. So if you want to read the entire book, and many books actually in Cardecopedia. Next section is going to be on the 6th of September with Fran. I think it's Fran. And it's going to be from page 217 and 18. And I think Fran is going to do a summary of all we've been, from a summary of the book on the 6th of September. So I hope everyone have a beautiful week that keeps safe and healthy, and we'll be able to see you in our next session. Next week, we have our therapeutical talk. And so peace be with all of us, and see you next study, the last one of this book. Thank you very much. Have a good evening.